In this section, we will focus on understanding the general components of an auto policy. There are many choices available for your clients. As we go through these sections, you will find one common theme when choosing coverage. How much can and does the insured want to pay out of pocket versus transferring that risk to the insurance carrier. As previously discussed, liability is where you are responsible for the loss or damage to others. This coverage pays for bodily injury and property damage. It will also pay for defense and civil court costs. This coverage is required by law in many states, though there are some exceptions. Each state may have different minimum requirements. When looking at the liability section of an auto policy, there are three components that you need to know: bodily injury per person, bodily injury per accident, and property damage. Bodily injury, like its title, refers to liability when someone is physically hurt from an accident. Coverage breaks down to per person and per accident. Usually, per person will start at $15,000 and per accident can be double this amount. Then it will go up from there. So how do you help your client choose the right coverage for them? The consideration would be both a financial and ethical issue. We start first with a question. What can the client afford and want to pay out of pocket when they become liable for an accident? For example, your client gets into a car accident and they are at fault. There were 3 people injured in the other vehicle. One has a medical bill of $5,000, the other has a medical bill of $7,000, and the last has a medical bill of $30,000. If your client chooses a $15,000 per policy, then the aggregate per accident usually would be double that amount. So in this case, it would be $30,000. In this case, the $30,000 medical bill from one party will only be paid up to a maximum of $15,000. And with all the other potential liability charges, the client is still exposed with a $15,000 out-of-pocket expense. So you can see how financially critical it is for your client to understand the importance of selecting the right coverage. For those clients who may feel they don't have many assets nor financial exposures, unless that client has no intention of growing wealth in the future, they must understand that if a judgment is won against them, that liability can be carried forward and collected when they accumulate assets. On the ethical side, let's assume that you've hurt someone who is the main provider for their family. That person is now in critical condition and can no longer work. How much do you think would be fair to take care of that person and their family? Liability property damage covers for repair or replacement of damaged property. Coverage usually begins at $5,000 and goes up from there. This coverage will pay for any property that your vehicle may damage and you are found liable. Just like bodily injury, the question is, what is the right coverage for your client? I'm going to refer back to the same question previously asked. What can your client afford to pay out of pocket should this situation occur? To paint a picture, first car has a damage of $30,000. Second car, $10,000. Third car, $2,000. The total repair or replacement cost would be $42,000. If the coverage is only $15,000, the client will have to pay $27,000 out of pocket. Can your client afford or want to pay for that? If not, this is where they may want to pay a little extra for the additional coverage. So to help the client determine the right coverage, the question to ask is, if damage occurs to a vehicle and you are liable, how much can you afford to pay out of pocket for the other party? Medical coverage pays for the insured and all passengers in the insured vehicle should they get into an accident and incur medical expenses. In many policies, it will also extend to the insured if they get hit by a vehicle as a pedestrian. Unlike the liability portion of the policy, medical expense coverage is not mandatory. When deciding on this coverage, we tend to check with the client to see if they have medical insurance that will cover for vehicle accidents. If not, higher coverage should be considered. Even if they have medical coverage that will extend, consideration for the deductible, copay, or other exclusions may dictate a need for some coverage. Medical coverage usually begins at $1,000, but higher coverage may be chosen. In consideration of coverage amount, we may want to consider costs not usually provided under a medical insurance plan, such as chiropractic care, acupuncture, cosmetic surgery. Comprehensive provides coverage for any property damage to the insured's vehicle that is not due to collision. Theft loss is most associated with this coverage, though it also covers for acts of God and nature such as hailstorm and wind. There are two exceptions that may seem like collision, but it is actually comprehensive. Hitting a live animal. Glass damage that isn't related to an auto collision. The deductible for this coverage can range from no deductible to thousands depending on the choice of the insured. To help a customer decide on the right deductible, I usually ask a question. What can you afford to pay out of pocket before needing the insurance carrier to pay for the loss? Of course, budgeting may also affect this decision. Even if the insured may struggle with a higher deductible, they may not be able to afford the higher premium related to a lower deductible. In such case, there may need to be a balance of coverage versus affordability. At the end of the day, it is still better to compromise and have some coverage rather than none at all. As the name indicated, collision covers for property damage that occurs to the insured's vehicle when it collides with something. When a customer has this coverage, it doesn't matter who is at fault. The insurance carrier will pay for the damage to the insured's vehicle. Collision coverage also offers deductibles similar to comprehensive, and consideration of the right deductible is very similar to what was discussed in the comprehensive segment. Though optional, this coverage is highly encouraged, and if rejected, many states will require that a rejection form is signed to ensure that the customer understands the potential consequences. Uninsured coverage provides for bodily injury and any pain and suffering that the insured and their passengers may incur should the accident be caused by a driver who has no insurance or does not have sufficient coverage. Consideration for proper coverage include medical expenses, loss of wages, and permanent damage. The question here would be, what can you afford if you got hit by a person that doesn't have insurance and you incur medical bills? The client should keep in mind that this coverage usually is limited to no more than the coverage chosen for liability, bodily injury. In other words, they can't protect themselves more than they protect liability to others. This coverage provides for property damage to the insured's vehicle if their vehicle is damaged by someone who is uninsured or underinsured. This coverage is simple. If your client has collision protection, it will pay for the cost of the deductible. If the customer doesn't have collision, the coverage will pay up to a maximum of $3,500. Premium for a policy that has collision coverage tends to be lower than ones that do not. Many will mistake this as a hit-and-run coverage. This is incorrect. It has to be established that the person doesn't have insurance or does not have sufficient amount of coverage. Otherwise, coverage will not extend. Car rental pays for temporary vehicle while the insured is going through a claim settlement. The coverage limit is based on a dollar amount, percentage of cost, or the number of days. This is good coverage to have should a comprehensive or collision occur, as the insured will have a replacement vehicle to use while their vehicle is being repaired or replaced as the claim is being settled. This coverage provides assistance to the insured in unexpected incidents such as keys being locked in the car, the insured having a flat tire, or an inoperable vehicle in an accident. Having this coverage will help the insured minimize potential costs of having to pay for services when these situations occur. Coverage may even pay for incidental travel expenses when a breakdown occurs while the insured is away from home. The cost is minimal and coverage may be well worth having. This coverage provides for an insured that sustains death, dismemberment, or loss of sight. Policy will pay based on a schedule, and as morbid as it sounds, coverage is usually by the percentage of lost limbs or eyesight, and 100% when a death is involved. The coverage limits may also increase if the insured was occupying a private passenger car and using a seatbelt in the manner recommended by the vehicle's manufacturer at the time of the accident. This coverage pays for lost earnings if the insured is unable to do the usual work or any other work for which he or she is reasonably fitted by education, training, or experience. The policy will pay a percentage of the insured's income and for a specified amount of time. There is also a requirement as to the time frame of when the disability needs to occur in order to qualify for coverage.